The year is 1917. 3 years into the most brutal war the world has ever known, a profound and dangerous shift is occurring in Great Britain. It is not happening on the battlefields of Flanders but in the hearts and minds of the British people. The target of this shift, their own King George V, a man who at the war's outset was the unambiguous symbol of national unity, the patriotic figurehead of a vast empire. But now a toxic narrative begins to take hold, a whisper that grows into a roar that the king is not truly one of them. To understand this crisis, one must look at the king's family tree. He was by blood undeniably German. His grandfather was Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. His grandmother was Queen Victoria, the last monarch of the House of Hanover. For decades, this German lineage was simply a fact of European dynastic life, a web of interconnected royal houses. But in the crucible of a war that demanded total, unquestioning loyalty, these connections began to look less like family ties and more like enemy allegiances. As casualty lists lengthened and anti-German sentiment reached fever pitch, the public gaze turned inward, searching for enemies within. The king's German name, Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, once an obscure detail, started to sound like a stain, a foreign taint on the very crown itself. And then the abstract fear became a terrifying, tangible reality. On the 13th of June 1917, a sound never before heard over London echoed through the skies, a sinister, mechanical drone. It was the sound of German Gotha GIV heavy bombers embarking on the first mass daylight bombing raid on the capital. For the first time, the front line was not a distant place in France. It was in the skies above homes, schools, and workplaces. The bombs they dropped brought indiscriminate death and destruction, shattering any remaining illusion of safety on the home front. Panic and rage gripped the city. In the aftermath of the carnage, as Londoners looked at the rubble and counted their dead, a horrifying connection was made, a piece of cosmic cruel irony that would shake the monarchy to its core. The name of these aerial bringers of death, the name plastered across every newspaper, the name that became a symbol of terror from the sky, was Gotha. Gotha. Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Suddenly, the king's family name was no longer an obscure fact for genealogists. It was the name of the enemy machine that was murdering British civilians. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. In the public mind, a direct line was drawn between the terror in the sky and the family in the palace. The name of the royal house was now synonymous with the name of the enemy's most feared weapon. The king wasn't just a symbol of the nation. His very identity was now linked to the nation's tormentor. The press, sensing the shift in public mood, fanned the flames. Newspapers began to run articles questioning the loyalties of the royal family. The king's cousins, who held German titles and were fighting in the German army, were publicly listed. The monarchy, which should have been the ultimate symbol of British resilience, was being successfully reframed as a foreign relic, a German dynasty occupying a British throne. The pressure mounted from intellectual and political circles. The influential writer H.G. Wells famously penned an article referring to Britain's alien and uninspiring court, a phrase that stung the king personally but perfectly captured the growing sentiment. Parliament buzzed with anxious debate. How could a nation fighting a total war for its very survival be led by a sovereign whose name was, quite literally, the enemy's? The suggestion, once unthinkable, was now openly discussed, that the monarchy in its current form was incompatible with a nation at war. It was seen as an embarrassing, even dangerous anachronism. King George V was in an impossible position. A devoted and patriotic Englishman, he was being publicly branded as a foreigner in his own kingdom. The very foundations of his throne were being eroded by a combination of public fear, political pressure, and the devastating coincidence of a name. He realized that to save the monarchy he had to perform a radical act of surgery. He had to kill his own name to save the crown. The crisis had reached its peak. The alien dynasty was under fire not from German guns but from the British people themselves. A decisive, unprecedented act was required to prove, once and for all, where the royal family's loyalty lay. The king knew that failure to act decisively could mean the end of his dynasty, swept away in the same tide of revolution that was already beginning to consume the thrones of his relatives in Russia and Germany. The House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was facing its final, desperate hour.